friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's It's a Bird, Heart Tree, and Fly High. So I've stamped the images I'll be using on Catherine Pooler Favorite White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So if you watched my recent coloring and story time video, you'll know that I'm going through some minor medical issues. I have a severely strained neck, which has made it difficult for me to film. And so I am still recovering from that. And so I am trying to get back to things and just make it as easy as possible for myself, spending a little less time at my desk and taking more frequent breaks, and just trying not to spend too much time looking down as I'm filming or looking straight ahead as I'm editing. So today I'm going to be sharing some tips for how to make a more simple card that you're still really proud of and that still ends up looking dynamic. So the first way to do that is just to go with a very limited color palette. So I am starting on this card with a red combo. I'm using R24, R29, and R39 for every other stripe on my large hot air balloon. I put that R39 right up against the artist drawn lines in each little section, and then blend it out with the R29 and use the R24 for a nice highlight. And I'm going to color the small hot air balloon the same. I'm just going to reverse which stripes I color red. So I'm going to do the inner two stripes red rather than the two outer and center stripe. And I'm coloring those in the exact same way, just using the very tip of my marker so that I can squeeze all three shades in there. Especially since I am going with a limited color palette, I want to make sure that the coloring really stands out and is striking and eye-catching. So now I'm going to move on to a cream combo. I'm using E40, E41, and E42. I'm going to use that E42 right up against the artist drawn lines of each of those sections, and I'm placing a very minimal amount of that. I wanted to have those nice shadows in the creases, but I don't want this to look light brown. I want it to be a soft creamy shade. So just using a little bit of that E42. I'm also going to color the smaller section right at the bottom of the striped part to be cream. And then I'll come in with the E41 and go right over the edge of that E42 and soften that up, pull it out just a little bit further into the white. And once I have all of that laid in, I will bring in the E40. And I'm going to repeat that process, but I'm not going to fill in the white completely. I'm still leaving a little bit of that white cardstock showing through, and that will ensure that those stripes look like a creamy white rather than a light tan. Then I'll grab my colorless blender and just go over that white cardstock, softening it in from the E40 so that I get a little bit of a smoother transition. Then I'm going to stick with those same brown shades, but I'm going to darken it up by pulling in E43, E44, and E47. And this is what I'm going to use for my baskets below my hot air balloons. And I did stamp and color an additional large basket so that I can put one of these birds inside. So I didn't necessarily need to color the one at the bottom of the large hot air balloon, but I decided to color it anyway, just in case anything would show from the sides. And it was kind of like a little bit of a practice run to see how I wanted that to turn out. And then I just colored the other two exactly the same. I'm moving on to my blue combo using B24, B26, and B29, and I'm going to color in all of my little flag pennant banners to be blue. Again, just keeping that color palette really simple. So the thing that keeping your color palette simple does is it helps with decision fatigue. It still takes the same amount of time to color the images because you would have to color them in no matter what, but you don't have to make as many choices about what colors go well together. So just picking a simple combo that you know looks good together, like red, white, and blue, is going to just make things a little bit easier for you mentally. And also you're just pulling out less markers, and so it does save a tiny bit of time in that respect. So I'm going to keep the blues, but I'm going to lighten them slightly. I'll keep that B24 and bring in B21 and B23 plus B000 for my birds, and I'm going to color them all to be bluebirds. Again, just trying to simplify things rather than think of how many different ways I can color birds, which if you're interested in a video on that, I do have a video on a dozen ways to color birds. So definitely check that out if you're looking for more variety. But for this particular card, I just wanted to go very simple. I love bluebirds, and so that's what I decided to go with. And choosing a blue that matches the pennant banners but isn't quite the same makes them go well together but don't look like they're made of the same stuff, if that makes sense. So I started with that B24 at the top of their bodies, on the end of the tail, the edge of the wings, and the top of the head, blended out with the B23 and then the B21. Then I'm bringing in the B000 to kind of transition into the stomach area. And then I'll switch to some pink shades. I'm using R11, R20, and R22. So this is in the same range of colors as the reds that I used on my hot air balloons. So again, it's still a very simplified color palette. Everything kind of matches and goes well together. It's just in varying shades. So I am giving my little birds some rosy cheeks and also coloring in their bellies. I used all three shades for the cheeks, but only the R20 and R11 for the bellies. And then I'm going to color in their beaks with Y15, just one shade since it's such a small little area. And then I'll trim these images out with their matching dies. So my second tip for creating simpler cards is to use pattern paper rather than creating a background with Distress Oxide inks or Copic Coloring or whatever you might like to do. So I'm going to take a piece of pattern paper from the Spiffy Speckles 6x6 pad, and I'm going to trim that down with the second largest of the large stitched rounded rectangles from Lawn Fawn. And I also cut down an extra piece of white cardstock just to give that a bit more stability. For the rest of my background, I'm going to die cut some clouds using the Spring Showers dies. And I'm going to cut 2 of each size so that I have a variety to use on this scene. While I'm die cutting things, I'm also going to work on part of my sentiment, and I'm going to use Finley's ABCs to die cut out of some lobster cardstock. And I'm spelling out the word sky and also adding a C to that, and I'll show you what that's for in just a little bit. So now that I have all of my die cuts, I'm going to go ahead and glue my focal panel together. And this is actually tip number 3. When you want to make a nice full scene, but you want to simplify, just shrink that scene in and make it smaller by using a smaller size focal panel. That way you can still fill it up to your heart's content, but you just have a smaller canvas to work with. So I'm going to pop that in my MISTI so that I can stamp my sentiment, and this is going to bring us to tip number 4. When you make a mistake, just find a workaround. So I was actually meaning to mask off the word skies, since that is what my die cut letters are going to spell, and I just forgot to put the Post-it tape over it. So rather than panic and start over with the focal panel, I just checked to see if my small cloud would fit over top of that word and mask it, and it did. So there you go. Try not to panic and just roll with the punches. So I'm going to stamp on the inside in Lawn Fawn Forget Me Not ink, and everything on both the focal panel and the inside of the card is from the Fly High stamp set. So I'm going to start assembling this focal panel, and that leads me to tip number 5, and that is, when in doubt, just move forward with the parts that you know. So if you watch my videos, you'll know that normally I assemble the entire card base first before I work on my focal panel. But for this particular card, I could not decide what color or pattern of pattern paper I wanted to use on my card base and what would accent the focal panel the best. So I just decided to move on with the focal panel, which is the reverse of how I normally do things, but I just needed to continue moving forward with the video, and so this is the way it worked out for me today. So you just saw me take that letter C and trim off a little portion of that to create an apostrophe to spell out the word skies, since there isn't one included in that die set. It's only letters. So, you know, that's not really a time-saving tip, but it is a little tip for you. Don't be afraid to look at your alphabet dies in a different way and see what else you can do with them. You can definitely create other punctuation marks. I know I have taken the letter I and turned it upside down for an exclamation point before. And I'm pretty sure you could turn the S into a question mark if you just flipped it over and cut it just right. So I'm arranging my clouds on my focal panel, leaving some to hang off the edges just to make the scene look a bit more expansive. And making that mistake with the word skies down at the bottom turned out to be a happy accident. I wasn't planning on putting any clouds down toward the bottom of that focal panel, but I think it actually ended up looking a lot more balanced with one down there, so that totally worked out. So now I'm just going to figure out where I am going to put my hot air balloons and make sure I have those placed how I want them before I glue my sentiment down. So I will go ahead and add those. I decided on placing the larger one down towards the sentiment on the right, and then the smaller one is going to go up a little bit higher in that top left corner. Then I'll add on the pennant banners. I'm going to start with the smaller one, and I'm just putting a tiny dot of glue behind each of those little triangles to make sure that that is nice and secure, and then wrapping that around the widest point of the hot air balloon. So my original vision for the larger one was to have the two pennant banners kind of wrapping at a diagonal around the balloon. But once I got it on there, it just felt like overkill. I didn't like the way that it was looking. So I decided to go back to just having one on there, again, just simplifying the card a little bit. And so I'm going to glue that on the larger balloon. Then I'll take the little bird that is facing forward with his wings outstretched, and I'm going to glue him just below the top of that basket, and then I'll take the additional basket and add that right over top so he's sandwiched between them, which makes him look like he's standing inside. Now that I have him situated on the card, I can finish off my sentiment. I knew that that apostrophe was going to have to go over top of the basket of the hot air balloon, so I needed to have all of those elements on there first. But now that that is done, I can go ahead and glue these letters into place, and I am just working my way backwards from the right to the left, adding in those letters and the apostrophe to finish off the word skies. And I really like sentiments like this because they can be used for so many different occasions. This could definitely be given as a graduation card since we are approaching that season, but it could also be used for somebody getting a new job or moving to a new location or just having a new opportunity presented to themselves, taking a leap of faith. There's just so many different things that this card could be given for. And so I think a sentiment like this just really works along with the dream big sentiment that I stamped on the inside. So now all that's left is to arrange my birds, and I'm just going to place those where I want them first before I start gluing things down. The space on this focal panel is starting to fill up, and so I just want to make sure that I place them in the right positions to still make it feel balanced. So I'm going to lay those out until I'm happy with how they're looking, and then I'll pick them up and start gluing them down into place. This glue dries super fast, so I wanted to make sure that I really knew where they were going to be placed before I started adhering them down. I'm just using my EK Success reverse tweezers for this since I had them out for the letters. Sometimes it's easier with tiny little die cuts like this just to keep my fingers out of the glue. I did decide to move this last little bird slightly over toward the left because I didn't want any of the birds to kind of be in line with each other from the top to the bottom. And so in order for that one not to be straight down from the one above it, I just shifted it a little bit to the left. So now it is time to make a decision about the pattern paper, and I decided to go with this blue grid from the Pint Size Patterns Summertime, and I'm going to trim that down with the largest of the large stitch rectangle stackables. That's going to give me that nice stitching detail around the outside edges, which is going to match up with the stitching detail around my focal panel. So I'm going to glue that down to the card front. And this is going to bring me to my last tip, which is just to go with your gut. So I wanted to simplify and just use one piece of pattern paper, but I knew I didn't like the way it was looking. There was just something missing on this card for me. And so even though the simpler option would have been to just leave it with one piece of pattern paper, I was able to quickly find another scrap from the What's Sewing On 6x6 pad that matched with the color scheme. It was already trimmed down, so I didn't have to die cut it, and I decided not to bother adding the stitching detail on that little piece because that would have taken up some extra time. So I did still keep it simple while embracing what my gut was telling me to do, which was just to add another element onto this card that would make it feel more like me. Another thing that makes a card feel more like me is to have a little sparkle on it. I knew I didn't want to get carried away with the Stardust stickles on this one because it is a very gender neutral card and I wanted to keep it that way. So I decided to add a few tiny iridescent stars, and so I am just dotting on little tiny dabs of glue and then picking up these little stars with my embellishment wand and setting them down into place. Once I have all of the stars on the glue dots that I have placed, I will reassess and see if I want to add a few more, which for me, it's hard to resist adding more, but I think a star shape is definitely still gender neutral. And so even though it does have a little flash of something shiny, it's not too feminine. So I think this card still works as a masculine card or a feminine card. You know, it really is kind of gender neutral, and along with the sentiment that kind of goes for lots of occasions, I think this is a really versatile one. So I couldn't resist adding a tiny bit of Stardust stickles, but I'm only going to add it to the pennant banners on the hot air balloons, and I only added it to one side where the darkest shading was, so there's not too much glitter. but it still shines and it still looks like a Christy Gets Crafty card, at least to me. So I will lift that up so you can see all of the detail and catch some of that sparkle and shine and give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I hope you enjoyed the tips for how to create a simple card that still feels like you. If you liked it, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. All of the products I used will be listed and linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in the next. Bye-bye.